Welcome to the Mindset for Runners podcast, helping you to access and unlock your true potential as an athlete.
Hey, it's Rob here. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. This is part 2 of how to beat imposter syndrome in running and in life. I had so much feedback, so many messages from the first episode, way more than any other episode I've ever done, that I really wanted to dive deeper and bring you more content and more ways that you can overcome your imposter syndrome, or as we've been calling it, the imposter experience. So I created a part 2, and because there's so many exercises that I go through in part 1 and part 2, I've put together a worksheet that you can download and use to work through with these 2 episodes to make sure that you find the right exercise for you. There's so many tools I'm going to throw at you again in the next coming episode, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. So I've created the worksheet, and then you can work through the worksheet, do the work on the worksheet as you listen to the podcast, and really find maybe the 1, 2, maximum of 3 tools that really work for you. So to grab that worksheet, just go to my Rob Mason Runs closed Facebook group, and that's just search Rob Mason Runs, and you can join the group, and I'll put the worksheet in there for you to download. Couple more announcements before we get into the show. I'm really excited because we're about to open up for our next cohort in the Mindset for Runners online program. So that's opening on July 22nd. If you'd like more information about the program and you're listening to this episode before July the 3rd, we're doing a free webinar on Wednesday, July 3rd at 12 p.m. all about what mindset training is, why you need to do it, what it's not, how you do it, and then I'll show you the entire course curriculum for my Mindset for Runners program, which you can join. Now, if you want to be part of that webinar, you can click the link in the show notes, and it'll register you for the free webinar. That's on Wednesday, 3rd of July at 12 p.m. If you know you want to sign up for the next cohort, spaces are limited. We only take 20 people on every course. So if you want to secure one of those spots, just contact me directly. So that's robmason.run@gmail.com, and just say, I want more. I want to be in the course, or I want more information. I can send you more information. So that's robmason.run@gmail.com, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. So to get the worksheet, go to the Rob Mason Runs Facebook group page. To join the free webinar, click the link in the show notes, and I'll see you on Wednesday. And if you know you want to be part of the second cohort, it's going to be amazing. We've already had such amazing feedback from the first cohort, and looking forward to the second one opening July 22nd. So you can just email me directly. And overall, I hope you're going well. Get lost out of this episode. It's really struck a chord with so many people, including myself. And what I want most for you is to have the tools to deal with your imposter syndrome as it comes up in the moment. Enjoy, and I'll see you at the end. Hey, it's Rob, and welcome to this episode of the podcast. This is a really special one for me because last time I did the podcast, it was on the imposter syndrome and how to overcome it. I had more emails, more messages from that individual podcast than I have over any other episode I've done, and it really struck a chord with a lot of you. And if I haven't got back to your message, I apologize. I will definitely get to it. It's just that I'm working through them. And thank you for contacting me, because this imposter experience, it seems to be insidious, and it seems to be something that affects a lot of us as runners, not just in our running, but also in life in general. So that's why we're here to do a part 2 today, because there's so much that I want to share with you about it. But mainly, as you know me, I want to give you the tools that'll help you overcome any form of imposter experience that you're having. And that's what this webinar is all about. And always the caveat that I use with the tools is, I'm going to give you a whole bunch. If they don't sit with you, just don't worry about it. Just dump them. But if something I say will land with you today, there's so many tools. There's like 15 different things I'm going to give you that are going to help you with your imposter experience. So if something's going to land with you, grab it and just use that one tool. Or maybe you find 1 or 2 or 3. Write them down, go back and listen to the podcast again and work through them. At the end of this podcast, I'm going to share with you how you can get access to an imposter experience worksheet that I've created. And all you will do to get that is just to join the private Facebook group that we've created here at Mindset for Runners, and you can get that that worksheet from the private Facebook group. So if you just search for Rob Mason Runs on Facebook, you can send an invite to join that group. All right, let's get straight into it. I'm going to start with a story about one of the world's best tennis players, Naomi Osaka. If you ever heard about her, she's absolutely brilliant. One of the most aggressive and just really entertaining tennis players to watch. Represents Japan and has won so many titles around the world, in the past, coming up now to 14, 15 years. So in 2018, she really came into her power as a tennis player. She beat Serena Williams as she won the US Open. She beat Serena in the quarterfinal for that. And then the next few years, she won a major title every year. She even ended up winning the Australian Open, and throughout that series, she beat Ash Barty. She was top of the best. She ranked number 1 in the world. She'd won all the majors, and she was at the top of her game. In 2021, she won the Australian Open in February. Come June, she went to the French Open and she sensationally withdrew from the French Open, stating mental health issues. From there, she lost early in the Olympics, which were in her home country of Tokyo that year, home country capital of Tokyo that year. She lost early in the US Open. She dropped out of Wimbledon all in the same year. And in August of 2021, she put a tweet up on the old Twitter, which said this: "Internally, I think I'm never good enough. I've never told myself that I've done a good job, but I do know that I constantly tell myself that I suck, or I could do better. I know in the past some people have called me humble, but if I really consider it, I think I'm incredibly self-deprecating. Every time a new opportunity arises, my first thought is, wow, why me?" When I heard this, read this interview with her and then read that Twitter quote, my heart sank for her. And I thought, this is one of the best tennis players, someone who I've admired over the years for the way she plays. And the imposter syndrome or the imposter experience is even very much alive at that top level. And so often I say to runners, you think the people at the front of the race are cruising and doing it easy. They're not. They're going through all the same battles that we are. It's just that they're a little bit further ahead of the track than you actually are. That's the only difference. So, Naomi Osaka was so good in bringing this to the fore and showing everyone that, this is what I'm going through in my life. Let's have a recap of what we learned in episode 1, which was the imposter cycle. Remember, this is how all the scientists have put this into a cycle, and see if you can relate to this cycle. I'm going to go through it quickly because there's more detail in part 1. Remember, it starts with a task or a title. For example, you get a new role at work, or you enter a new race, or you open your own business. Whatever triggers your definition of success or that you're growing in some way. Step 2 is the self-doubt phase, right? So you sign up for that race that you wanted to do, you're really excited about it, and then boom, as soon as you are signed up for it, that sinking self-doubt feeling comes, like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Who thought this was a good idea? But here you are, and now you're going to do the thing, right? So then after that self-doubt phase, people will split into 2 main categories where they'll go down one path and either over-prepare or the other path, which is procrastinate. And again, I'm sure you know which one you normally go down, or the people that you love go down, right? So then whichever one you choose, you either spend months and months preparing and over-preparing and doing everything, dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, or you just throw it together at last second and you just, manage to get through the thing, but you do it. It works and you succeed. And this is in the imposter experience, the thing that people are most likely looking for is that step 4, which is actually the feeling of relief. Now, that feeling of relief is only short-lived for imposters, because as soon as you get any form of positive feedback from anyone, like you did the race, or congratulations on your new role, or well done for doing that thing, step 6, and this is the key in the imposter cycle, is you discredit your success. You chalk it up to an unrealistic amount of work that you're never going to be able to duplicate, or you just got lucky, right? At which stage you feel that sinking feeling of perceived fraudulence. So like Naomi Osaka, it's step 7, it looks like humility, but it's actually not. You genuinely believe you only succeeded because of every other reason you can think of except your own competence, right? So that's the key, these key steps, discrediting your success and then feeling like that fraud. So step 8, what do? you get a new task to prove to everyone that you are not a fraud. But remember what we learned last time, no one actually thinks you're a fraud. There's that spotlight effect. And once again, I'm sure you heard it in the first one, the spotlight effect is everyone's walking around thinking that there's a spotlight on you, and everyone around the world or around your experience is watching you like you're the main singer on a stage in a dark theater. When in fact, the reality is no one's watching you. Everyone's got their own spotlight on themselves, thinking that everyone's watching them. So that step 8 is getting a new task, and you go back to the top and you try it you start the cycle again to try and get that feeling of relief that all of us imposters are chasing. Right, I heard a great interview with Chris Bennett. So Chris is the Senior Director of Nike Global Running, and he talked about the imposter syndrome in the context of runners. He said, he's talking about runners in general. He said, even after successfully completing numerous races in the past, runners question their ability to take part in a sporting event. They constantly downplay or underestimate their performance. They think they are not fast enough or cannot go the distance, and they ponder their poor technique. My hands raised up. And even if they do win, they attribute it, here we go, to luck or favorable circumstances, not to their hard work or skill. These runners fear that one day they'll be unmasked, and that a real runner will realize they are a fraud. This self-deprecation particularly affects regular runners. Wow, that's from the Nike Global Running Senior Director. Let's go to sports psych Eli Straw, who I really admire. Eli, he's got a great YouTube channel called Success Starts Within. So he talks about imposter syndrome as having an altered self-image. So follow me on this one. This is a quote from Eli Straw. If we feel like a fraud, then our self-image will always be at least one level below what it actually is. So I'm just going to pause there, right? So this is how the imposter experience perpetuates. If I asked 10 of your friends, 20 of your friends, 50 of your work colleagues or people that know you to give feedback on who you are, what you're capable of, what your skills are, what your strengths are, and generalize all those results, you'd get kind of the level of where you're at as perceived by everybody else. Generally, imposters will be one level below that. So what I mean by that is you'll keep yourself lower in whatever way than you actually are. Now that means that actually performing to your normal level of competence seems like a stretch to someone who's having an imposter experience. That's really, can you feel how hard that actually is? To go out and just be your average normal level of competence feels like a big stretch. Back to Eli Straw. We'll have faulty perceptions of ourselves which line up with the feeling of inadequacy rather than how others truly see us. So again, if we go to all of your, for instance, your race results or your times or your data from your wearables, they will show that you are at this level of running, whatever level that might be. But the imposter experience will say that, no, that's not actually accurate. We're actually just a little bit lower than that. And that's how this thing perpetuates. So have you ever felt that feeling where you know you're capable of more, and it's just kind of eats away at you? I'm not sure if you can experience that. Or sometimes it can perpetuate as like a resentment that other people are out there doing it, and you kind of feel like, I could be doing that, but it's like this low-level resentment, and that's actually that imposter experience, and your body saying to you, you're actually capable of more than this, and that comes from keeping yourself one level below where you think. All right, so with that introduction done, let's move into the how, and the how is going to be, again, all these tools that I've found over the last couple of weeks since the last episode, and how you can take these tools to dance with imposter syndrome, to overcome it, to whatever, to work with it so that it doesn't have to swallow you, if that makes sense. So again, the caveat is I'm going to throw a whole bunch at you. If you like it, use it. If you don't, ditch it. Let's start with reframing. I'm going to get back to organizational psychologist Gaj Ravichandra, who said, and this on the first podcast, it's not the imposter syndrome. You're having an imposter experience, right? So that's the reframe. Instead of thinking it's a syndrome that you're never going to be able to, get over, it's just that you're having this experience as an imposter. So you can reframe imposter syndrome to something which I've been playing with in the last couple of weeks, which is I'm having a growth experience or the growth syndrome. where I'm actually growing, and that's why it feels unfamiliar. And then going to gratitude. So feeling grateful for that growth. Like if you're having the imposter experience, it means in some way you are stepping up or feel like you're growing. So bringing that into gratitude and saying, there's people around the world and around me who are struggling to survive. And here I am, I get to do this, right? So that's reframing. Reframing is changing the context or the meaning of something. And what you've done here is you've changed the meaning, that this is not something hard, this is something I get to do. Number 2, this is an interesting one that I've been working with. What are your list of rules, right? So you've got these unconscious rules. You don't walk around with a list of rules, but if you can get clear on what your rules are for you to call yourself a good runner or a capable runner. For example, it might be something like this. I don't know where this list comes from, most likely me over the years. I should know everything about how to train for this race. This is the list of rules for me to be a competent or good runner. I should know everything about how to train for this race. I should always be motivated. I should always find it easy to get out of bed and do my run. I should get faster every time I run. I should be running ultra marathons. I should be posting all my runs on Strava and commenting and doing stuff on Instagram. I should train super early before work. I should always be doing cold plunges. I should never miss a workout. I should always be doing strength work. I always should be feeling confident, and on it goes. If you can grab just a few of these, of what you think you have to do in order to be a runner or the level that you want to be at, then you can start to realize all of this, how you set this bar so high for your success. Right, next one, mental imagery. I was working with an athlete a couple of weeks ago on this, and it was really fascinating. So they were talking about this huge race they had to do and how it was just mammoth, and it was just the biggest thing they've ever done. It was massive, all these big words, right? So we got to the athlete and how they were imagining this race that they were doing. And the imagery was that this race was huge in their mind, like a big picture, and they were this little tiny picture in comparison to this big race that they were going to go in. Now, I know we say these things like it's huge, it's long, it's a big thing what we're doing, but if you can get a grasp on how you're using mental visualization or imagery as a contrast, that you're this little tiny thing in the corner and there's this huge thing that you're undertaking, you can start to play with these images. And as soon as you play with the images, your emotion will actually change. So you can, yes, make yourself bigger in comparison to it. So we were using the analogy of that it was like they were Moana facing the lava monster, if you've seen that movie, right? Moana's this tiny little girl against this huge mountain of a monster. And that's the way this athlete was representing the race. So what we could do is make you bigger, so that you're equal in size or even bigger than your mental image of the race, or you can shrink down the image. I hope this is making sense. When you change the mental imagery, it changes the emotion, and then it will change your actions that you're doing in relation to it. Next one, quite simple. The imposter experience drains your energy, and I'm sure you're aware of this. So how do we build it back up? Now, there's a technique that we use called how to find your best running experience. And basically, it's a closed eye process where you sit down and you go back through all of your beautiful running memories and you pick 1, 2, or 3 of them and you pull out the traits that make that the best experience for you. For example, it might be when you were just feeling confident or in the flow or feeling light, or it just felt easy. And you remember those experiences and you bring them out, and then you start working with those words in your life, because you want to build up your energy by bouncing off memories that are real for you to build that confidence. And your best running experience is a great way to do that. Next one. This is something that came to me when I was running the other day, actually. If you're more of a giver in life than a receiver, and I hope you know what I'm talking about here. You know how some people are just constantly giving to others and doing things for others and putting others first. It's all about others. If you're that type of person, sometimes it can be hard or unfamiliar to receive, right? So you can block being given a compliment because you are so used to giving that it feels like you have to flick a switch or be in a different state to receive a compliment. Now, if you're not receiving a compliment, if it's bouncing off you from a genuine compliment or genuine recognition, acknowledgement from someone, then there's something to look at in you, because the way that we build our confidence, build our enoughness is by this resume, this like reference of all the things that we've done, that we can say, I've done that so I can do this. Now, if all of these acknowledgements are bouncing off you because for whatever reason, what you can do is flip that switch around and start to work on yourself of all of the things that you have done in your life, such as previous races, such as all the training that you've done, such as your discipline, your work ethic, your grit, your determination, your friendliness, your kindness, all those beautiful things. You can work on those to counter this feeling of I'm not there. So the imposter syndrome is keeping you one level below where you actually are. So the short answer is, how do you learn to receive? The longer answer is, how do I open myself to acknowledging myself for all of the things I've done, so that I can give myself a foundation of which to build my growth on. I hope that's making sense. Again, if it doesn't, ditch it. All right, on top of everything else, I read a great book over the last 2 weeks called The Imposter Syndrome by Dr. Harold Hillman, PhD. And the reason I wanted to, the chapter I wanted to bring to you in this episode is something you may have heard before, but it's said in a different way. So Dr. Hillman talks about the two voices that are always present in our mind. The inner critic, which he also calls your soul's chief justice, and the inner coach. So you might have heard these concepts before, but stay with me because he had a really good take on it. He says these voices grew up with you and with each other. So you, the inner critic, and the inner coach have been together since day dot, right? Now, let's learn a bit about them. And this is just really an awareness exercise so that you can attribute your thoughts and your voices in your head. No, you're not crazy. We've all got them. To these two things. Right, the critic. So both of them love you dearly and want the best for you. They grew up with you. They want the best for you. But the inner critic cares about you so deeply, it's more interested in not failing than in succeeding. I hope you get that distinction. The inner critic says, letting yourself and others down is painful, and it fortifies the imposter syndrome. The critic is the one who decides when you should raise or lower the bar in terms of standards. This is your standards, and it almost always raises it. Yeah, you did that, well, you're not there yet. Yeah, that was good, but you're not there yet. Yeah, okay, you're not as good as blah, 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 blah. The critic sees the world as black and white, grey is a bad colour. The critic's main objective is to keep you safe. So the fewer risks you take, the less you put yourself out there, the less you expose yourself to scrutiny and criticism. And that means the safer that you are. So the inner critic wants to build this protective bubble around you, right? Because perfection can't be disturbed in that safe, protective bubble. And that's ultimately how the inner critic defines love, as a state of perfection where there's minimal chance of error. So anything you do in life, or you want to do in life, that's going to compromise that perfection or being seen as that, it is a threat. And the critic's like, you're not going to do that. You're staying in the bubble, and I'm going to use any tool I have to keep you there. Right, ouch. I just had a thought. Sometimes I listen to podcasts on 1.5 times or 2 times, and I know I speak quite quickly. I was actually wondering if anyone listens to these on 1 or 2 times, because that would be hilarious. Okay, next thing. The coach. So the coach is the other voice. The coach also loves you, and the coach wants you to grow and have more experiences, more adventures in life, right? So it sees taking risks as the fuel for that personal growth. And it sees staying in that bubble as having no opportunity to stretch or grow or interrupt the status quo, if that's what you want to do. So personal growth is attached to aspiration, right? So it's not necessarily being the best, because sometimes that evokes a state of defensiveness and having to prove and hold your position. It's about, the coach is about being better than you currently are. So the difference is the coach is encouraging you to risk failure in order to be stronger. Now, why did I share this with you? I'm hoping you can take the inner critic and the inner coach running with you, and maybe you could sit down and journal with them, but figure out which part of you wants to stay still, stay stuck, not stuck, but stay safe, and keep everything just nice, and which part of you wants to grow, and start to work with both of these and attribute the voices to one or another. So, I mean, if you put this in the context of running, you found a race you want to do. It's something you've either always wanted to do, or for some reason you're drawn to this race, right? So the inner critic is going to say, don't do that. There's no need to do that. You've done these races. They're good enough. I don't think you can run that far. I don't think you're good on that type of terrain. I think you might, there's a good chance of failure. So this is a really bad idea. You're going to have to travel. It's going to cost you money, or whatever it's got. It's going to throw all this stuff at you. Whereas the coach is saying, go for it. Don't worry about the outcome. Let's go and run that race. It's the journey, not the destination, right? That's the coach's catch cry. It's like, let's go and see who we can become by doing this race. And it attaches the growth is the important thing. Whereas the inner critic is worried about what happens if this outcome happens and how do we stay safe. I hope this makes sense. But these two things will fight and bicker and torture you. But until you can understand and attribute the voice to either one of them, that's how you work through this stuff. All right, let's move on from the Imposter Syndrome book, which is a great book if you want to catch up with it. The next one is another book, actually, called The Gap and the Gain by Benjamin Hardy. Now, quite simply, the whole premise of this book, you don't have to read it, I'm going to tell you what it is imposter syndrome is perpetuated, imposter experience is perpetuated by looking at the gap between where you are and where you think you need to be, right? Again, it's like you're at one level and you think you need to be at the other level, or I'm not as good as this yet, or I did that thing once, but I got lucky, or it was just the weather, or it's just everyone else didn't turn up to the race. So that's the gap. The gap is I'm currently here, I want to go there, and there's this huge gap in between, and that's saying I'm not good enough. Whereas the gain is focusing on where you've come from to where you are now. I hope you can understand that in this timeline, right? So where have you come from, and how much growth have you gone through over your life to where you are now? So attributing these two things, that is, for me, such a helpful book in saying, am I focusing on the gap or am I focusing on the gain? And it can be one of those mantras that you can have running. And sometimes I take a mantra with me. So I always do two things before I run: intention and gratitude. So I always have the intention for the run. Could be just to flow, find some rhythm, look around, use this new tool, bring joy, work through my thoughts, some kind of genuine intention that I want to take. And then gratitude is I think about something that I'm grateful for before I run. So the intention could be, I'm going to take the gap and the gain for a run with you today and find out where am I focusing on the gap and where am I focusing on the gain. Because I can guarantee you, your enjoyment in life comes from recognizing the gain and then going after something without focusing on the gap. And I hope you can get the distinction there. I'm going to keep on moving. I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to do this one. A mantra. So much stuff I've done on mantras in the past, but a couple, if you hear, the imposter syndrome's mantra is this: if I can do it, anyone can do it. Does that make sense? That's what the imposter syndrome says. So it's very self-deprecating, right? Oh, why am I so special? If I can do it, anyone can do it, right? We've got to come past that and start working on things like Ben Crow's got a beautiful mantra: I'm imperfect, but I'm worthy. Right? Or even just simply, I am enough. I heard someone say around this, stop being a narcissist and start helping people, right? And what they were talking about was imposter syndrome is very self-focused. It's all about that spotlight effect. And they were like, well, stop being a narcissist. No one's thinking about you. Focus on how you can serve others. And I thought that was a beautiful reframe as well. And then something else could be what I know is valuable to others, or if just one person benefits from this, it's worthy. All right, I'm going to keep on moving. I'm just ditching a couple because I've covered them in previous podcasts. All right. Yeah, jar of awesome. Let's go back to recognize your achievements quite quickly. Tim Ferriss talks about in one of his earliest books, I think it was the 4-Hour Work Week, he talks about his girlfriend realizing that Tim never ever gave himself credit for anything. He just constantly drove forward in life and never ever recognized any of his achievements. So she got a big mason jar on the bench, heaps of post-it notes, and anytime he did something good, they'd write on, whatever he did, fold it up and put it in the mason jar. And then once a week, they'd sit on the couch, she'd pull out the mason jar and just randomly pull out a post-it note and said, do you realize that you did this week, did this week, this week? So this is what I actually have I've actually played with this. It's so good. I can't underestimate how good this actually is. And you got to make it simple, right? You got like, I let that person in front of me in the line, or I was kind to that person who I didn't know, or I did just little simple things. Don't have to do all these grand things. But what you're doing is building up that acknowledgement of self, so that when you're going for something, you've got a baseline to fall back on, instead of the imposter syndrome, which just deletes all of your brilliance and says that you're not even close to being good enough yet. So that's called the jar of awesome. Pleasure pain model is a very famous model used in psychotherapy, and the pleasure pain model is basically recognizing, strap yourself in here because this one might hit you. Let's suppose that your whole imposter experience is created to keep you safe, right? So that inner critic we learn about, it's just keeping you safe. So you want to go for something, the imposter syndrome cycle kicks in, and the whole purpose of it is to keep you safe. So the pleasure pain model says, what's the cost of staying safe? Right? So instead of focusing on, this is a nice warm little shell here, I'm going to stay here. Well, what's the cost, right? And the way you use this model is you say, what's the cost of staying safe for me now? And it's probably not much, right? Because you're getting a lot out of it. You might be in a secure level of running. Let's do it in running. So you might be comfortable with running the current 5K or 10K that you're running. And please just take this as an example. And there's a part of you that wants to step up and do something longer or harder, like a trail run or something that scares you, right? But it's safe where you are, and you know how to do this 10K, and you can grow in 10K by getting your time down or getting your form better or something like that. So you convince yourself that you don't want to step up. What's the cost of it in 12 months if you're still just, and I'm not minimizing 10K, just stay with the example, you're still just running that 10K. Right? And then 3 years, right, from there, you're still happy with 10K, you're still trying to get your time down, you're working on your form, right? And then 5 years time, so you're still on 10K, and then you go out further and further, and there'll be a point where it's like, if 20 years time, I'm still focusing on my 10K, do I really want that? Is that going to bring me what I really want in my life? And if the answer is yes, brilliant. But I'm guessing that through this experience, if you've used your own distance or racing, there's probably a part of you that does want to grow as a runner. And using this model can help you to take the next step earlier by going into the future and not doing what Homer Simpson did when he was eating all those bags of pork rind, saying, well, that's a problem for future Homer, and I certainly don't want to be that guy. So take the pleasure pain model. Gosh, at least I'm laughing at this. Take the pleasure pain model. Where are you staying safe? And then stack that pain. If I'm still here in a year, I'll be happy. Yeah, no worries. If I'm still here in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, am I still going to be happy? And that's the way that you can bust out this imposter experience. I read a great article from the Austrian youth basketball coach on imposter syndrome. That's Nabil Murad. He wrote a great article called Tackling the Shadow Player. And the shadow player was an indicative model of this imposter that follows you around. So here's his game plan, 4 steps for how to tackle that imposter experience. So stay with me here. Step 1, talk about it. Right, how many times have you heard that? Sounds simple, but it's game changing. Chat with teammates, coaches, or anyone you trust. You'll be surprised how many have felt the same. Remember, the research, even from the early 90s, said that 70% of people experience it. And there's more research, so much research on this now, but it's more likely, I think the last one I read was 82%. Sharing lightens the load and breaks the isolation. Step 2, celebrate every win, and I mean every win, no matter how small it seems. Have you scored a 3-pointer? Awesome. Improved your personal best? Epic. Every step forward is progress, and acknowledging it reinforces your rightful place in the game. Your rightful place in the game. That's what we're trying to do as a runner, right? I am here, and recognizing that you're at this level and not trying to minimize yourself. Step 3, educate yourself. Understanding the imposter syndrome deflates its power. Realize it's a common experience that doesn't define your talent or your worth. Knowledge is power, my friend. And step 4, refocus on learning. So shift the focus from proving yourself to improving yourself. View every practice session and every game as a learning opportunity, not an exam. This mindset turns pressure into progress. Remember, that inner critic focuses on outcomes. The inner coach focuses on progress. and on the process and progress. Okay, here we go. I'm going to give you a little reflection exercise now. So you can do this wherever you are. You don't have to write it down, but you can if you like later on. So now you've learned about the imposter experience. I'm wondering, have you been able to identify somewhere where it is actually holding you back? So haven't you? Let's keep it in running, but you can use it in any context you like. For example, have you not gone for the race you want to because you feel you aren't capable of the distance or the terrain, the speed, or whatever it is? And then I also want to put this caveat on it. Are you in the place where you're not recognizing your brilliance or your progress or your competence level? Or are you in this place where you keep going, you're driving ahead, you're making things happen, but you're constantly looking over your shoulder and wondering where you're going to get found out? It's like, I got away with that one, or they're going to find me out as a fraud. I can't maintain this, right? So I just want to acknowledge that you could be in one of those two places before you start this one. So think about where it's holding you back. And then I want you to think about these kind of goals or mantras or exercises and what you can implement out of these sentences like these little tools I'm going to give you now, that's something you can take away to practice this week. So first one, be less of a perfectionist, which I know is hard. Practice a healthy response to failure, mistakes, and constructive criticism. Imposters don't really like that. So this is how we can practice a healthy response. We're going to learn more about that in the next piece I'm about to do, which is my favorite part of this podcast. Next one, stop being afraid to speak up in meetings or classes. Be less sensitive to constructive feedback. Yeah, there it is again. Understand that a certain amount of fear and self-doubt is normal. So normalize it and not a sign of ineptness. Expect that learning curve. Understand that some things will come more easily than others. Not be afraid to ask for help. Ouch, that was one of mine. I wasn't real good at that. I'm getting better. I'm in what's the word where I'm in work in progress with that. So not being afraid to ask for help when I need it. And stop expecting to perform at an equally high level in everything you do, right? So just because you're good in one context, give yourself a break that you not have to be good at everything. And then the third thing is, what's an action you can take to do that? For example, choose someone you respect to give you constructive feedback on something. So it could be videotaping your running form and sending it to someone you know to say, is there a way I can, improve this, do you think? Or even just asking an open question, what do you think I can improve about my running? Or what race do you think I'm capable of doing that I haven't seen yet? You can ask a friend a question like that. And then another thing I wanted to give you for the last piece is find a race or an event you'd like to do and make a list of reasons why you are capable of going for it. Because you've probably got a whole list of reasons why you're not. Pardon me, just had a sip of my tea. Okay, let's move on to the last section of this podcast, which comes from the work of Dr. Valerie Young. Now, she did a really brilliant 6-minute TED Talk. It's really worth watching. And her research, she's been researching imposter syndrome for, I don't know how many years. She talks about doing it in the 80s. So that's how many years she's been doing. So I'm going to read a lot of this because it's something that I want you to hear, hoping that it might actually work. Hoping, there's the word. So Dr. Young, one of her overarching questions is, the research says that 70% of people have experienced imposter syndrome. Instead of focusing on that 70%, let's look at the 30%. And what are they doing that they're not having an imposter syndrome experience, right? Which I love as soon as she said that. I was like, right, I'm on board here. So let's have a look at what she says. There is a lot of that 30% that it's attributed to the Dunning-Kruger effect. So two researchers, Dunning and Kruger, I forget which university, I think it's Stanford, they come up with the effect, you may have heard of it, which is basically where people overestimate their abilities. Normally people who are beginners in their field, they overestimate what they know, which is kind of like the opposite to imposter syndrome, right? And they have an inflated view of themselves. So we're not talking about them. Okay, so let's put them to the side. There's a percentage of that 30% who aren't experiencing imposter syndrome. We don't know what the percentage is, but let's look into how they're thinking and what they're feeling and how they're acting, right? So that's where we're going with this last piece. Because Dr. Young says we need an alternative A third alternative to, I can either feel like a fraud, i.e. imposter syndrome, or be an arrogant jerk, which is Dunning-Kruger effect. Well, not always, but the arrogant person who thinks they're better than they are. We've all met them and we don't want to be them. And that also perpetuates our imposter syndrome. So let's give us a third choice. And the third choice is what she calls the humble realist. What a great two words put together. Remember, Matt Fitzgerald, 80-20 coaching, author of many books, says that the best people who recover from injury are ultra realists, right? So there's this realism that imposter syndrome takes away our ability to see things as they are, and we deflate ourselves and keep ourselves small, right? So she's saying, be a realist, see yourself as they are, as you are, but be humble as you're doing it, so you don't have to inflate it. So these genuine, humble realists, they're no more intelligent, no more capable than the rest of us. It's just in the exact same situation where you and I might have this imposter thought, they're thinking different thoughts. And they're thinking these thoughts in 3 different areas. Competence, number 1. They're realistic about what it means to be competent. Remember that list of rules I asked you about? What are your list of rules of competency? Well, humble realists have a list of rules that are realistic about what their competence is. It's not overinflated. Number 2, they have a healthy response to failure or mistakes, and they realize it's part of the journey, right? So imposters, if they slip up once and they fail once in whatever that means, it's like devastating for them, and it perpetuates the cycle, and all of the negative beliefs get reinforced. And the third thing that these humble realists has, they have a healthy response to fear, right? So just those 3 things again. They're realistic about competence, what it means to be competent. They have a healthy response to failure and mistakes, and they have a healthy response to fear. Okay, so healthy is being able to see it as it is and not in an emotional, clouded way through the imposter experience. If we think about the model of behavior, so CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, basically works on the model of you have a thought. So if you think about thoughts lead to feelings, which lead to actions. Just think of it basically in that thing. So I have a thought, it gives me a feeling, and then from that feeling, I act, I do something about it. So Dr. Young's looking at what are the thoughts these 30% are having so that we don't end up feeling like an imposter and then acting like an imposter. For example, you think about signing up for a race, you have a thought, I could never do that. Your feeling is a feeling of disempowerment, and then your action is you either don't sign up for the race, you pick a shorter, flatter one, or you don't do anything at all, right? So what we want to work on is when the imposter syndrome comes up, the question is, what would a humble realist do, right? And she says humble realist thinking is similar to entrepreneurial thinking. They're seeking out information to make things better, right? Imposter syndrome and imposter experience are crushed by feedback. Now, her system of doing this is having the awareness of the thought. So, I'm in the imposter cycle, right? Then she says pause and say, well, of course I feel this way. Most people would. You can textualize it. And then you have that question, how would someone who is humble think about it? So you have awareness, I'm being an imposter. You have, that's weird. Sorry, I just give a thumbs up, and then I just had a big bubble of a thumb come up on my new screen. So how would someone, the awareness of the thought, number 1. The second thing is normalize it. This is a normal response to something I've never experienced before. And the third thing is, how would someone who's humble think about this? Right. So, and to deepen that level of how they would think about it would be, how would they reframe this situation? And that reframe could be, I'm signing up for this new race. It's normal to be nervous about it because I've never run that distance, or I've never been to that state, or I've never done that type of race before, right? That's normal. So then how would a humble person feel differently? Well, they would say, anxiety is normal in this situation because it's uncertain. How would they think differently? Well, it just means, I've got a bit more work to do in my training to prepare for that distance or that surface, or I probably need to get more gear. Right? And then what would they do differently? They'd probably make a plan, whereas imposter would freak out and think about the reasons that they're not good enough. The humble realist is identifying all of those gaps and then working out a plan to address them. And then after that, it's acting, and acting like you really believe that new thought. There's a great phrase in, again, comes from sports psych, and really George Mumford, who was Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in the early 90s, he was their mindfulness coach. He talks about acting as if, which is very different to the phrase fake it till you make it, which I don't really like, never have, but he talks about acting as if. So that is acting in the way that the person who's already got the result you want would act. And that's exactly what Dr. Young's talking about here. And James Clear talks about it too in Atomic Habits. What's the type of person I have to be? How would they think and act, and what would they do, right? And you're acting as if you've already got the thing, or you're already capable of it, right? And that's really what we're looking for here, is that logical way to build a plan to get the thing that you want, instead of getting caught in the imposter cycle. All right, so with that, we've come to the end of the podcast. I am live right now with some runners who are in the Mindset for Ultra Runners course that we're currently running, and we're coming to the end of this webinar. So if you do, when you come on board for the Mindset for Ultra Runners course, it's really cool. You get to be on these live podcast recordings, and we can have a chat afterwards and do some questions and answers. I did want to mention before we go, if you want to get that imposter syndrome worksheet that I've created, the best way to get it is to join the Rob Mason Runs private Facebook group. So you just go to Facebook and search for Rob Mason Runs. It's a private group, and you can ask to come into the group, and I'll be posting the worksheet in there, so you can get it from there. So you can do that right now and get the worksheet, and that'll help you work through all these tools, have a reference point to them, and have some exercises where you can actually do the work instead of just listen to the work. And with that, I'm going to leave you with a couple of quotes that I came across the last 2 weeks when I was preparing for this podcast. This is from a beautiful speaker. He's actually a National Geographic photographer, Dewitt Jones, and he's worth looking up because he's a fascinating dude. And he said something along the lines of, we can be filled with self-doubt and still move forward with courage. We can learn to trust our own competence and show up authentically. And I love that. Just because there's self-doubt doesn't mean you don't have to move forward, right? You can still move forward with courage. And he said, try and be the best for the world rather than the best in the world. And that one resonated with me a lot. So the last thing I want to leave you with was from a beautiful song, which I only heard for the first time this week, called For a Dancer by Jackson Browne. And this is how we're going to say goodbye today. Don't let uncertainty turn you around. Go ahead and make a joyful sound. Into a dancer you have grown from a seed somebody else has thrown. Go on ahead and throw some seeds of your own. And somewhere between the time you arrive and the time you go may lie a reason you were alive, but you'll never know. That's from Jackson Browne, For a Dancer. Thanks for listening. I hope you got something that can help you dance or work with the imposter experience whenever you have it. And until next time, I'll catch you later.
Thanks for listening to the Mindset for Runners podcast. I hope you got something practical and useful out of this podcast, or something inspiring to help you get out for your next run. If you have a question about Mindset for Runners or athletes in general, please email me at robmason.run@gmail.com, and I'll answer your question on an upcoming podcast. And if there's anybody you know who could benefit from the information I share in this podcast, please share it with them. See you next time.